Krasarian Sector Marshal Drolk stood on the observation deck of the flagship Obedience Unyielding, his 6 compound eyes narrowing as the swirling blue-green orb filled the central holoscreen. He extended one of his upper limbs to magnify the image. Clouds drifted lazily over vast oceans, broken by sprawling landmasses teeming with vegetation. Thermal scans reported abundant biosigns but minimal energy output. No sign of deep space vessels, no active defense grids, no planetary shields. It was perfect, a sleeping fruit waiting to be picked. He clicked his mandibles and turned toward Tactical Overseer Velch, whose long crest shimmered with authority. "Confirm designation," Drelk ordered, voice sharp and electric. "Confirmed, Marshal," Velch replied. "Target is listed as Planet 362, National Gamma Sector. Energy classification Primitive Level 4. Estimated native sentience, bipedal, inefficient communicators, still dependent on combustion engines. Strategic value, moderate atmosphere processing potential, and hydrocarbon resources. 0 military threat." Drolk allowed himself a moment of smug satisfaction. For centuries, the Krasarian dominion had expanded efficiently, sweeping across the galactic rim with calculated precision. Civilizations that barely understood the basics of quantum mechanics folded in days, their infrastructure converted, populations relocated or repurposed. This campaign, codenamed Operation Subdue 42, was part of the latest strategic initiative: seize low-resistance biospheres and consolidate forward supply lines. But what pleased Drelk the most was that this particular target had not even been considered by the High Council until now. An overlooked dot, drifting silently on the edge of a minor spiral arm. If the operation went smoothly, and it would, he would receive a commendation, perhaps even elevation to Grand Strategist. He could already imagine the ceremonial robes woven from Vezarth silk and the scent of rising fumes during the victory burning. "Deploy Vanguard," he ordered. Velch tapped a command rune. Across the fleet, hundreds of massive hangar bays opened simultaneously. Thousands of invasion pods detached from carriers like beads of quicksilver. Engines ignited in perfect harmony, forming elegant attack formations as they descended toward the unsuspecting world. The Krasarian armada moved with a grace born of centuries of conquest, their ships shaped like crystalline shards cutting through the void with predatory purpose. The Krasarians prided themselves on not wasting time with psychological tactics. There would be no broadcasting of demands, no ceremonial threats. Subjugation was a science. The atmosphere would be breached in 5 minutes. Planetary communication systems would be jammed. Centers of governance would be obliterated within an hour. The rest would fall in line, as they always did. As the pods accelerated, Drelk turned his attention to a side screen showing the profile of the planet's dominant species. He squinted at the image of a hairless biped with forward-facing eyes and a curious smirk. The species had no unified leadership, fragmented territories, competing ideologies. Their weapons were crude. Most still fought with ballistic projectiles, flame-based engines, and chemical explosives. Their technological growth was erratic and emotionally driven. Yet something about the creature's expression lingered in Drelk's thoughts. A flicker of unpredictability he disliked. He dismissed the concern. From her console on the bridge, Data Archivist Drenel softly cleared her throat. She was younger than most of the command staff, barely a cycle past maturity, her fronds still tinged with green. "Marshal, I've detected an irregularity." Drelk rotated one of his primary eyes toward her. She hesitated. "There is a red designation in the archival database connected to 362H. It appears the planet was reviewed by the High Council approximately 300 cycles ago, but the classification was later obscured. The last status update is marked as confidential, forbidden, and sealed under Level 0 encryption." "Level 0? Drolk repeated, his tone disbelieving. "That level is reserved for cosmic anomalies and theoretical hazards." "Yes, Marshal, but no context was preserved in the accessible archives. The entry was locked manually. Whoever filed it wanted the planet ignored." Drolk straightened to his full height, his crest flaring slightly. "Why was this not raised earlier?" I followed standard targeting protocols. The red designation was buried beneath updated survey logs, possibly overwritten when a junior analyst flagged the planet as a viable candidate last rotation. For a moment, silence hung over the bridge. Drelk considered recalling the fleet. Reprocessing a target was not shameful, especially with contradictory data, but he also considered the political optics. He had already announced the campaign's initiation. His rivals would scent weakness if he pulled back now. Besides, the initial scans confirmed the planet's inferiority. It was most likely a clerical error. "Proceed," he barked. "We conquer. We analyze later." As the pods entered the mesosphere, flames licked their sleek surfaces, and shock waves rippled across the upper atmosphere. From the surface, the sky lit up with burning trails like a meteor storm in full fury. Civilians from various nations pointed skyward in confusion. Some filmed it with their devices, others screamed. Military radars worldwide spiked simultaneously, their systems struggling to identify the unknowns. In a government command center buried beneath a mountain in Colorado, General Marcus Holloway stared at the screens as alarms shrieked in every language known to humanity. His uniform clung to him like a second skin as he barked orders, fingers flying over encrypted consoles. Event Omega. Full spectrum scramble. Initiate defense protocol and satellite override. I want eyes in orbit. I want command lines open. And I want the damn Space Force awake and airborne 10 minutes ago. The operator beside him blinked. "Sir, incoming ship's number in the thousands." "Then let's make sure they know who we are," Holloway growled. On the far side of the globe, in a secure submarine base off the coast of Norway, Admiral Ingrid Madsen was already deploying Earth's secret orbital kinetic defense grid. She had spent most of her career lobbying for its funding, often dismissed as paranoid. Today, no one was laughing. Meanwhile, in the Kruzarian fleet, Drelk turned back to the display as the lead pods began breaching lower layers of the atmosphere. He expected to see cities in chaos, populations frozen in fear. Instead, he saw flashes of light rising upward, guided missile trajectories, energy beams that pulsed with unexpected precision, drones, small, fast, maneuverable, attacking pods in swarms, crashing into them with deadly efficiency. One of the Kruzarian pilots screamed through the comms as his pod exploded mid-air, engulfed in a fireball. Another was hijacked by a virus uploaded through unknown bandwidth frequencies. Its trajectory altered until it crashed into its own fleet. Drelk leaned forward, his skin twitching. "What is this?" he demanded. Velch was pale, his claws trembling. "Unknown weapons. Source, human." The marshal's gaze fixed on the burning orb before him. Suddenly, that smirking image of the human returned to his thoughts. He felt something unusual, a sensation he had not experienced in 200 years. Doubt. The first contact missile, designated Tactical Spearhead VX-9, never made it to the surface. It disintegrated in mid-air, struck by an invisible defense system that didn't appear on the Kruzarian sensors until it activated. Marshal Drelk watched in silence as the explosion bloomed across the lower quadrant of the view screen, the debris scattering in unnatural spirals. No warning, no traceable energy spike, just raw, deliberate obliteration. He didn't speak, neither did Velch. Both stared at the readouts, which now began to shift wildly. Static pulses, electromagnetic interference, jamming algorithms unknown to Kruzarian libraries. It was as if the planet had suddenly awakened, annoyed by an insect bite. Elsewhere in orbit, Fleet Commander Throck attempted to maintain formation, barking commands as his ship began experiencing severe navigational instability. Artificial satellites, previously considered obsolete hunks of metal, suddenly revealed hidden emitters. Directed pulse weapons sliced through the wings of smaller scouts like monomolecular blades. His second-in-commander, Lieutenant Gurn, tried to initiate evasive maneuvers, but the controls refused to obey. The main console displayed an unfamiliar language. The ship's AI shrieked an error signal. "Remote access breach detected." Throck spun toward Gurn, his spines rigid. "What is this?" "I don't know," Gurn admitted, clawing at the controls. "We've been hacked. Our own systems are being turned against us." The ship lurched violently, throwing both officers against the reinforced glass. Outside, 24 Kruzarian pods detonated in synchronized bursts, their contents vaporized. From above, small dark dots rained down what looked like simple debris at first, until they began tracking targets and accelerating. Earth-origin drones. Small, rapid, aggressive. Not military-grade in the traditional Kruzarian sense, but smart, agile, and customized for chaos. Some exploded near pod engines. Others attached themselves and burrowed through the plating, delivering localized EMP bursts that left the pods drifting and blind. On the other side of the planet, Captain Isaac Ramirez stood inside the subterranean command center of Earth's Orbital Defense Initiative, deep beneath a desert mountain. He kept his eyes locked on the three-dimensional tactical display that hovered above the central console. Red dots marked confirmed enemy units. Green flashes indicated drone kill zones. The sky above Earth was turning into a storm of fire and falling metal, but it was all controlled. "Targeting grids holding, launch another wave," he said calmly. A technician beside him, a young analyst named Juno Park, hesitated. "Sir, if we launch another volley, we'll breach public visibility protocols." Isaac nodded once. "The sky's already on fire. At this point, we might as well show them the fireworks." Juno's fingers moved swiftly across the interface. In orbit, 24 kinetic rods dropped from satellite platforms. Each was forged from tungsten alloy and guided by Earth's gravitational pull, traveling at hypersonic speeds. The result was devastating. Khazarian destroyers shattered on impact, the sheer force bypassing shields and cutting through hulls like paper. One rod pierced straight through a battleship, igniting its core reactor. The explosion tore a hole in the orbital line, sucking 2 adjacent cruisers into a spiraling descent. Inside the Obedience unyielding, the bridge fell into chaos. Alarms flared. The holographic projection of Earth flickered as multiple feeds were scrambled by interference. Marshal Drelk tried to regain tactical control, but his command deck no longer responded to high-frequency overrides. Someone, or something, was interfering with their systems directly from the planet's surface. Not with brute force, but with surgical precision. "Velch," Drelk snapped, "rewrote systems to manual. Initiate close quarters protocol. We're being dissected." Velch obeyed immediately, but his claws trembled as he accessed the auxiliary interface. "Marshal, the encryption, our override codes are being rewritten in real time. This isn't just interference, this is intrusion. Calculated, adaptive," the Marshal growled. "How? Their species shouldn't be capable of cognitive synchronization at this scale. They don't have a central hive, no cerebral network. They're fractured." "They may be fractured," Velch replied, "but someone down there knows how to fight." On the ground, Major Victoria Adeyemi watched a live satellite feed of the battle. Her command post was nestled in an underground silo repurposed from Cold War architecture, somewhere beneath Nigeria's Obudu Plateau. She was a veteran of cyber warfare, a master of drone coordination and system disruption. This was her territory, and the enemy had walked into it blind. "Deploy swarm node Charlie 9, she ordered. Across the upper atmosphere, dormant devices hidden inside decommissioned weather satellites activated. They emitted targeted pulses, scrambling enemy flight trajectories by broadcasting false navigational data. Khazarian ships veered into each other. Some collided. Others were lured into atmospheric drag zones where they burned spectacularly. Victoria watched the feeds with clinical precision, tracking every movement like a conductor guiding a symphony of destruction. In space, Commander Throck's vessel was caught in a decoy corridor. His ship's sensors failed to detect the change until it was too late. The vessel dipped below safe altitude and began to heat. Hull integrity dropped rapidly. Gurn screamed a warning, but there was no time to correct the descent. The ship shattered on re-entry, the pieces scattering like glass across the upper Indian Ocean. Not all Khazarian units were failing. A few managed to pierce the atmosphere, surviving Earth's wrath long enough to approach the surface. But what they found there wasn't submission, it wasn't chaos, it was coordination. In the American Midwest, a Khazarian drop pod landed in what appeared to be farmland. The hatch opened, revealing 4 assault troopers equipped with plasma lances. They marched forward cautiously. 10 seconds later, they were surrounded by pickup trucks, military jeeps, and 3 homemade flamethrower units operated by rural militia. The first Khazarian fell to a shotgun blast at point-blank range. The rest were disabled by coordinated fire and a Molotov cocktail launched from a barn rooftop. Meanwhile, on the eastern border of Poland, a similar pod met resistance from university students armed with modified drones, homemade explosives, and hacking rigs. The students had organized via a private online network minutes after the first explosion. They had no military training, but they had grown up in an age of endless war simulations and information warfare. Their leader, a physics graduate named Alexei Nowak, coordinated the ambush from a laptop powered by a car battery. He never lifted a weapon. He didn't need to. The machines obeyed. On the bridge of obedience unyielding, Marshal Drelk finally issued the order he had never spoken before in his entire career. Initiate fallback protocol. Velch looked up. "You're retreating?" "I'm surviving," Drelk growled. "We engaged without understanding the battlefield. That was arrogance. We must preserve what remains." "Marshal, we've lost over half the fleet." Drelk didn't answer. His thoughts were consumed by a single terrifying realization. This planet wasn't primitive. It wasn't passive. It had simply hidden behind the illusion of chaos and confusion. But beneath that surface was something else. Something deadly, adaptive, and patient. A force that didn't announce itself with banners or broadcasts. Humanity hadn't risen to fight. Humanity had waited, and now it was winning. As Drelk began transmitting the retreat beacon to what remained of the Kruzarian fleet, he locked eyes with the central display one final time. Earth rotated slowly in the void, serene and indifferent. He clenched his claws. This is not over. But deep inside, for the first time in over a century, he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure Earth would allow him to leave. The sky above Johannesburg had turned into a battlefield. Streaks of flame marked the fall of wrecked alien vessels, and the thunder of their impacts rolled across the high veld like war drums. But amidst the smoke and chaos, human activity didn't slow. It sharpened. From the rooftops of the Santon Financial District, snipers in exosuits calibrated their scopes against fast-moving targets, while swarms of quadcopters buzzed overhead like aggressive hornets, scanning for heat signatures and relaying battlefield data to command nodes embedded beneath the city. Inside the fortified basement of a hospital, Dr. Amina Chikande worked rapidly over a wounded soldier who had been pulled from the wreckage of a downed satellite station. The man's ribs were shattered, lungs compromised, blood already pooling in his chest cavity. She didn't ask where he had come from, who had sent him, or what unit he belonged to. None of that mattered. He was breathing, barely, and she intended to keep it that way. As she worked, the walls trembled with a distant shockwave. Dust sifted from the ceiling tiles and coated her gloved hands, but she didn't flinch. Her assistant, a young nurse named Elise, stood nearby, feeding vital stats into a battered tablet, her eyes wide but focused. "More pressure on the chest wound," Amina said. Elise obeyed immediately. "More alien ships just came down, close to the university. We'll worry about that later," Amina replied. "Right now, this man needs lungs more than he needs news." In a nearby room, improvised generators hummed steadily. Power had gone out in the city's main grid hours ago, but Amina's team had connected life support systems to solar batteries and car engines. On the hospital's upper floor, former engineering students were retrofitting defibrillators into directed energy pulse weapons. What had started as a trauma center had transformed into a resistance hub. South of the city, near the cradle of humankind, a lone Kruzarian assault unit trudged through the tall grass. His name was Karak, a mid-level ground officer and one of the few survivors from a pod that had crash-landed off course. He had lost his comlink during re-entry and his external sensors were partially fried. Despite this, he pressed on. His orders had been clear: establish forward reconnaissance and relay data to Orbital Command. But Orbital Command was no longer responding, and now he was relying on his suit's navigation module, which was barely functional. He scanned the terrain ahead. Rolling hills, sparse trees, a few concrete buildings in the distance. Primitive, as expected. He raised his pulse rifle and continued moving. What he failed to notice was the small sensor node buried beneath the soil 20 meters ahead. When he stepped on it, a signal was sent instantly to a satellite dish mounted atop a water tower several kilometers away. Within seconds, a drone awoke from its powered-down state. Its rotors spun to life, lifting it into the air with an almost inaudible whisper. It didn't fire. It didn't engage. It only watched. At the same time, in a garage in Pretoria, a teenage girl named Naledi was seated before 5 monitors, chewing on a pencil and tracking Karak's movements. She wore a headset cobbled together from spare parts, and her eyes flicked between screens as she adjusted the targeting feed. "Got you," she whispered. Beside her, her older brother Tondo adjusted a lever on a jury-rigged command board made from an old gaming console. "Should I deploy?" Wait," she said. "Let's see where he's going. We might be able to herd him into the rail yard. Better trap coverage there." He smirked. "You're starting to sound like Dad." She grinned, but didn't look away. "Dad taught us to play chess. This is just a bigger board. 3 kilometers away, Karak reached a long-abandoned train station. The old tracks shimmered under the sun, twisted and rusted, but the area was otherwise deserted. He knelt by the entrance, activating his internal scanner. Behind a pile of rubble, the decoy began to beep. Karak turned toward the noise and raised his rifle, but too late. The ground beneath him erupted in a net of charged cables, pinning his limbs and electrifying the air with a sharp crackling sound. He convulsed violently, then collapsed. From above, the drone descended silently and administered a sedative gas through its bottom nozzle. Karak's last memory before unconsciousness was the feeling of pressure on his chest and the realization that the locals had built this trap without any known Krasarian tech. In orbit, Marshal Drelk slammed his fist against the tactical interface. Half his ground units had gone dark. The remaining ones were scattered, isolated, and being picked off not by planetary governments but by civilians, students, farmers, children. The planet was not acting like any prior conquest target. Its defensive systems were not unified under a single protocol. They were scattered, unpredictable, local, but devastatingly effective. That chaos, which he had once viewed as a weakness, had revealed itself to be a weapon, an ecosystem of independent minds operating with decentralized logic. It was like trying to capture a swarm of fire ants with a net. "Marshal," Welch said, approaching carefully, "a new report from the Southern Quadrant." Drelk turned, his eyes seething. "Speak." "Our infiltrator probes have captured audio footage from intercepted communication frequencies. The humans, they're sharing strategies with one another, in real time, across borders, languages, factions. Impossible. They fight each other. Not now, not for this." Welch handed him a playback crystal. Drelk activated it, and the audio began to play. Snippets of English, Swahili, Portuguese, Russian, Mandarin. Different voices, all repeating one idea. Do not engage alone. Share the enemy's weakness. Fight smart. Drelk stood in silence as the implications washed over him. This species was not bound by protocol, but it wasn't directionless, it was reactive, observant, and very, very fast. Elsewhere, inside a mobile outpost speeding through the Australian outback, an elderly man named Charles Fennick coordinated airstrikes with a team of retired fighter pilots. He hadn't flown a jet in 20 years, but his muscle memory returned within minutes of taking the controls. His co-pilot, a young woman named Zoe Liang, guided their modified Mirage 3 over the desert sands, dropping EMP-laced charges on incoming landing pods. Neither of them worked for a government anymore. They just hated the idea of surrendering to aliens with fancy guns and bad attitude. As the Krasarians attempted to re-establish a base on Earth's surface, Charles and Zoe struck again and again, operating out of a refitted livestock hangar near Alice Springs. Fuel was rationed, weapons were few, but what they had was knowledge of the terrain, the wind, and the skies. And that was enough. Back aboard Obedience Unyielding, Drell could no longer deny what had become evident. Earth was not like the others. His fleet, once numbering in the thousands, had been reduced to a scattered handful of survivors. The ground war had devolved into a hunt, and not one in Krasarian favor. He turned away from the view screen and addressed Welch directly. "Prepare all remaining ships for orbital retreat." Welch stiffened. "You're giving up?" "No," Drelk hissed. "I'm saving what remains." Welch nodded but paused. "What should I mark in the report? What designation shall I assign to this world?" Drelk took a long moment before answering. His eyes lingered on the Earth, its oceans glowing blue, its atmosphere glowing with fire, and its surface bristling with a resistance more potent than any weapon. He finally spoke. "Mark it as Deathworld." The Krasarian fleet began breaking formation. Like a crystal shattering in slow motion, the remaining warships peeled away from Earth's orbit, accelerating toward the upper layers of the atmosphere in ragged groups. There was no elegance now, no discipline, no symmetry. What was once a proud invasion fleet had become a battered procession of survivors. Marshal Drelk watched in silence, his fingers clasped tightly behind his back as the fleet's navigation charts flickered with red alerts and override failures. His command ship remained stationary above the Pacific Ocean, suspended like a bruised predator, unsure whether to retreat or strike again. In the control chamber, Welch's face glistened with the sheen of anxiety. He moved between consoles, issuing evasive paths and defense rotations, but for every adjustment he made, another alert flared to life. Human interference had reached beyond the planet's surface. Probes were being hijacked, communications scrambled. Two of the departing cruisers suddenly spiraled into collision, their trajectories subtly altered by a field the Cruisarians couldn't trace. It was sabotage, it was deliberate, it was precise. Drelk turned toward him, his voice hollow. "Report the status of Ground Division 12. Velch hesitated. "Erased. No survivors." Drelk didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the holographic display of the Earth, still pulsing with shifting data. His mind circled a question he no longer dared to ask aloud. What else did we miss? Aboard a low-orbit cargo ship on the Earth-facing side of the planet, Captain Elijah Brandt adjusted his suit collar as he monitored the enemy's retreat. His team had launched from a hidden base near the Mojave crater line 30 minutes earlier, carrying a payload designed not to destroy, but to disturb. The package was experimental, quantum entanglement mines, built from recovered alien scrap and human ingenuity. His second-in-command, Maria Tenorio, stood beside him, clutching the trigger control unit like a relic. "They're scattering," she said. "Should we drop it now?" He studied the vector paths of the fleeing ships. One cluster was beginning to synchronize, a regrouping maneuver meant to create a warp tunnel alignment. He smiled coldly. "Drop it right there." With a mechanical hiss, the bay doors opened, and 6 translucent pods slipped into the void. They drifted silently, invisible to Cruisarian sensors, and then snapped open like blooming flowers. The mines within didn't explode. They didn't need to. They emitted pulses, subtle shifts in quantum balance that disrupted navigation algorithms and confused artificial intelligence systems. Within seconds, the coordinating fleet scattered again, colliding and swerving in blind panic. One Cruisarian vessel veered directly into a descending piece of debris, its own wreckage from an earlier skirmish. On Earth's surface, Victoria Adeyemi, now relocated to a mobile command vehicle stationed near the Congo Basin, watched the fleet flounder. The forest hummed with insects and wet heat, a stark contrast to the cold chaos above. She stood in the open hatch, speaking softly into a headset while drones buzzed overhead like steel mosquitoes. "I want confirmation," she said. "No signatures, no energy buildup, no warp shadows. We watch until the last one disappears." Her technician, a Kenyan mathematician named Rahima, nodded. 3 confirmed kill zones, the rest are limping, no warp traces yet. "If they try to punch out of the system, we'll catch it." "Good," Victoria replied. "Make them feel it. All of it." Half a world away, in the ruins of a destroyed Cruisarian pod near the city of Kyoto, a small group of civilian engineers were busy disassembling the wreckage. At the center of the group stood Satoshi Genda, a retired roboticist turned resistance asset. With surgical precision, he removed the ship's neural core and handed it to his granddaughter Mina, who secured it in a shielded case. She was barely 15, but her eyes gleamed with the same curiosity that had once made him a pioneer in neural mapping. "What's this one for?" she asked. "Pattern study," he replied. "We need to understand how they think if we want to stay ahead. This core is damaged, but some of its decision logs are intact. Their commanders were confused, afraid." "That's useful," she nodded. "They made a mistake." "No," he corrected. "They made 2. First, they underestimated us. Second, they assumed we wouldn't learn fast." Above them, lightning cracked across the sky, unnatural, dry, and pulsing with residual energy from destroyed atmospheric probes. Mina looked up. "Are they coming back?" "Eventually," he said. "But next time, we'll be the ones waiting." Back aboard, obedience unyielding, Drelk's personal quarters were silent. He had dismissed the bridge crew. Even Velch had been ordered to stand down. The Marshal stood alone, staring at the crystalline projection in front of him, a 3-dimensional record of Earth's defensive response. The projection had reshaped his understanding of warfare. Where he expected rigidity, he saw improvisation. Where he anticipated fear, he saw fury. He tapped the panel and rewound the feed, pausing at a particular moment. A human woman, face smeared with oil, her arm in a sling, stood atop a captured alien vehicle, rallying a group of civilians who were arming themselves with stolen alien weapons. He zoomed in on her face. There was no fear, only fire. He shut the projection off. In the stillness, a soft alert chimed at the wall console. An encrypted message. Not from a Cruisarian ship, not from his own fleet. The encryption layer was unfamiliar. The signature, Earth-based. He activated it, and the message played in a synthesized voice, translated into Crisarian Standard. It was calm, measured. The language was simple. "We noticed you left something behind. Don't worry, we'll return it, piece by piece." Then silence. Drelk stepped back, his breath shallow. He had no idea how the humans had tapped into their communication relay, no idea how they had learned to embed code in a Crisarian-compatible protocol. But they had done it. He now understood that Earth was not just defending, it was retaliating. Quietly, surgically, and relentlessly. In the hangar of Obedience Unyielding, a damaged pod began to emit sparks. One of its internal systems had rebooted without command. A single phrase looped on its damaged screen: "Forgot to check the name." Drelk stared at the phrase for a long time. He finally turned away, issuing a single-word order: "Purge." The screen flickered, the message erased. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. That phrase would echo across his thoughts long after he left the solar system. He hadn't just attacked a planet. He had walked into a living storm of defiance, intelligence, and collective vengeance, and now he was fleeing it, in silence. Marshal Drelk stared at the void stretching before his ship as the last navigational vector was plotted for the retreat jump. The Earth had finally disappeared from view, reduced to a dull dot on the edge of the screen. The moment should have brought relief. Instead, it brought silence. One so heavy that even the hum of the ship's core drive felt intrusive. He stood alone on the command deck, arms clasped tightly behind his back, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon that no longer promised conquest, only escape. Welch returned from the lower deck, his movements subdued, as though the weight of the failed campaign was etched into every joint of his frame. He approached slowly and stopped a few steps behind the Marshal. He didn't speak at first. He knew Drelk was processing the magnitude of the defeat, not just a tactical failure, but an existential one. Drelk broke the silence. "Have the remaining ships cleared the system?" Welch nodded. "Affirmative. All 39 vessels have entered sublight holding patterns. None report pursuit." "Yes," Drelk murmured. Welch hesitated. "Should we initiate full warp?" Drelk didn't answer immediately. He walked to the starboard viewport and pressed his palm against the reinforced barrier. Somewhere in that spinning dark, humanity was already gathering its wreckage, studying it, storing it, preparing it. Not to admire or understand Crisarian superiority, but to weaponize it. He knew how Earth would respond. He had seen it in their patterns, in their expressions. There would be no submission. There would be no apology. They would never forget. "No," he said, "not yet. Prepare the long-range transmission to the High Council." Welch blinked, surprised. "You wish to report from within contested space?" Drelk turned, and for the first time since departure, his voice carried finality. "We cannot afford to soften what happened here. We were not defeated in battle. We were unmade by assumption. The High Council must know that Earth is not a target. It is a mirror. What we saw there is not an anomaly. It is a reflection of what we abandoned generations ago. Adaptation, instinct, rage. Let the Council see this clearly before some other Marshal tries to correct my mistake with another fleet." Welch bowed slightly and walked back toward the comms station, the order already taking root in his disciplined mind. Drelk remained at the viewport, but his eyes no longer focused on the stars. He was remembering something, a moment, barely more than an impression, when one of the Earth's drones had locked onto his ship and then, inexplicably, disengaged. The drone had the shot. It had scanned, charged, and hovered, but it didn't fire. Instead, it had beamed a message to the ship's outer hull. "We see you. Now run." He had never encountered a civilization so bold as to mock an enemy mid-conflict, not with fury, but with precision-crafted contempt. And that made the sting of retreat feel like something more than defeat. It felt like judgment. Far below, on the planet that had inspired such fear, humanity moved swiftly. In a mobile base hidden within the Amazon rainforest, General Marcus Holloway paced across a makeshift operations deck, littered with alien fragments, tactical readouts, and aerial recon images. His uniform was torn at the shoulder and his right eye was swollen shut from a plasma near blast, but his stride was steady. He had already debriefed 3 regional command teams and personally transmitted coded directives to over 70 nations. He stopped at a console operated by Lieutenant Naomi Lang. She was young, but her mind moved with rare clarity. She had been the first to map the orbital retreat patterns and predict which vectors the aliens would use to exit the system. "Have they reached safe distance?" he asked. She nodded. "All confirmed. They're limping but steady, no signs of reinforcements." "Good. Initiate recovery protocol phase 3. Prioritize intact tech." Naomi's fingers danced over the controls. "What do we do with the captives?" "Separate them. Isolate each one. No shared language, no network access. We'll question them once psychological orientation is complete." She hesitated. "And when that's done, we decide whether they're prisoners or professors." In a secure lab under the Swiss Alps, Mina Genda and her grandfather Satoshi finished scanning the captured neural core. What they found inside wasn't a command protocol or weapons schematic. It was fear. The Krizarian AI had recorded emotional spikes from multiple officers, including Drelk himself. Mina didn't fully understand the implications, but Satoshi did. For a civilization that prided itself on pure logic, emotion had no place in battle memory. The presence of fear meant that Earth had struck deeper than the body. It had pierced the mind. Back in the outback, Charles Fenwick stood outside the hangar with Zoe, both gazing at the horizon where the last ship had vanished minutes earlier. The air was hot and still. Dust clung to the edges of the damaged Mirage 3. Neither spoke for some time. Then Zoe broke the silence. "So, that's it?" Charles exhaled slowly. "For now. But we won't get this kind of surprise again. Next time, they'll come smarter." "Next time?" she asked. "There's always a next time." She frowned. "You think they'll be back?" Charles nodded. "Eventually. But that's the point. We made sure they leave knowing we'll be ready." He looked up at the sky. "We always were. We just hadn't been tested in a while." From Earth's orbit, long-range surveillance drones quietly activated a second phase. Their mission was no longer defensive. It was observational, and then exploratory. Humanity's scientists were already piecing together star drive algorithms from wreckage. Engineers from multiple nations collaborated across encrypted channels. Blueprints began to surface, not of weapons, but of vessels. Earth wasn't just preparing for defense anymore. It was preparing to move. A month later, in a sealed chamber within the United Nations Emergency Assembly Hall, the leaders of 82 nations gathered behind closed doors. The speaker that day was not a president or general, but a woman named Dr. Elina Moretz, an astrophysicist from Finland who had been the first to successfully isolate a viable energy signature from a Krizarian reactor. She walked slowly to the podium, eyes firm, voice calm. "The stars are not empty," she began, "and now we are not either." The chamber was silent. "In the past, we've waited for threats to come to us. Today, we have the power to seek answers ourselves. The war we survived was never about territory. It was about recognition. We were tested, and we responded not with chaos, but with unity. We became something new." She looked around the room, and for a moment her voice dropped to a near whisper. "They came here expecting a target, but they left knowing our truth. We are not prey, we are the storm." In the orbit above, aboard the last remaining Krizarian destroyer now drifting far from Sol's gravitational pull, Marshal Drelk recorded the final segment of his report. The tone of his voice was no longer arrogant or sharp. It was measured, exhausted, humbled. "Let this record stand," he said, "that we encountered a species not yet united by empire, nor advanced by our metrics, yet their will to resist exceeded our calculations. Their capacity to adapt rendered our intelligence irrelevant, and their instinct for survival was not a tactic, it was their identity." He leaned closer to the recorder. "Do not return to that planet. Do not test its patience. For though it does not yet fly among the stars, Earth belongs to no one." He ended the recording, the console dimmed, and in that dark chamber, alone and unblinking, he realized Earth had changed him. It had changed all of them. Some defeats are temporary. This one was permanent, and Earth, quiet now but watchful, had earned a new place in the galaxy, not as a battleground, but as a warning,